Hey everybody, welcome on into Bible Basics class. A couple minutes late, sorry about that. Had to make sure everything was set so we get on Bible study tonight. Guys are trickling on in. Thanks for joining us tonight in Bible study. Of course, as you come in, make sure you swipe to the right so you can share, let all your friends and family members know that you are in Bible study tonight on Periscope. We're going to have a good time tonight in our Bible lesson. If you're a member of New Psalmist, of course, let me know that you're watching. If you're a member of another church, let me know your pastor. Hey, Ken, my wife is on. She's supposed to be in class. But yeah, she's on. Hey, Mr. Doug, glad you guys are joining in with us tonight in Bible Basics. Hey, Denzel, what's up, man? Glad to see you on with us tonight. We're going to have a great lesson. Last week, we had to skip a week. I was out at a conference in Phoenix, Arizona, and you know the time different. The time out there is it was 2 hours behind in the winter, and then when the clocks go up, it's 3 hours. But I was out there, and the conference was still going on, and I knew it just was going to be tight. I wasn't going to be able to get on. I didn't want you guys to have to get half a lesson, so we had to take a week off, and then we'll pick it back up tonight. So I'm glad we're on. Hey, my mother's on. First Lady of New Psalmist Baptist Church, Lady PGT3. Y'all give her a shout out, throw her some love on Periscope. Got her on Periscope tonight. I feel honored. Got my mother in my Bible study class. But we're going to have a good time. Glad you guys are all in with us. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to start a little quickly tonight. You know, as of course, make sure you send me info right on the screen where you're watching from. I'll give you shout outs as we go. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Got a couple of announcements. We'll make you guys aware of what's going on at New Psalmist. There's a lot going on as we get ready for the Easter Holy Week and Easter at New Psalmist. It's been exciting 2 months of the year. It's hard to believe that we are already in the month of March. 2016 is flying by, but I'm excited about all that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. So I encourage you to come on out to New Psalmist next week. On this coming Sunday, Bishop will be beginning a new series entitled Man on a Mission. It's going to be exciting. We have some special guests that will be sharing with us that I don't want to give it all away, but one of the biggest companies in Baltimore, let me rephrase that, one of the biggest companies in the United States of America, the CEO of that company is going to be with us on Sunday. So I think you want to make sure you're at New Psalmist. I won't give too much away so Al doesn't get me, but just want to give you that a little bit. So I hope to see you at New Psalmist 7:15, 9:30, and 12 o'clock on this coming Sunday. And then next week we'll be in Holy Communion on Thursday at 6:45. We have an exciting opportunity that has come up for the millennials at New Psalmist. We have the opportunity to go on a mission trip to Jamaica in July. You know, we've been looking, and as we began this new ministry, we were looking at ways where we could introduce a missions component. Hey, Bishop Thomas is on with us. You know, make sure y'all give him a shout out, show him some love on Periscope today. We have an exciting opportunity for the millennials of New Psalmist to go on a mission trip to Jamaica, and we are so blessed that this opportunity came our way. If you are interested in this opportunity, this is just millennials, 18 to 33. If you're interested in this opportunity, I need you to send me an email. My email is jathomas@newpsalmist.org. jathomas@newpsalmist.org. Once you guys send me an email if you're interested, I'll get you all the information. But we don't have many spots, but we want to see who's interested. The people I've talked to, the millennials at New Psalmist that I've talked to already, are very interested in it. So if this is something that interests you, make sure you send me an email so I get your information, get you down, and we have you on the list so that you can be a part of this great experience here, get all the information. But I'm excited about the possibilities that it brings because I believe that God is calling us to do ministry all over the world. So this is part of taking that mission to go ye therefore, making disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That is the Great Commission. God called us to go out from where we are and continue to make disciples all over the world. So this is part of us fulfilling that Great Commission. So if you're interested, once again, send me an email, jathomas@newpsalmist.org. jathomas@newpsalmist.org. And as always, if you've been blessed by these Periscope Bible studies over the last couple of months, this is, I believe, our 18th Bible study that we've been on this medium in Periscope. If you've been blessed by it, I encourage you to sow a seed into the ministry at the New Psalmist Baptist Church. You can go right to our website, newpsalmist.org, click on donate and give our offering right there. Or you can even text a gift to 28950. In the subject line, type NPBC space in the amount you want to give. We're seeking to continue to do great things for the kingdom, and we appreciate all those who do sow into our ministry. And we encourage you, if you've been blessed by all the things that New Psalmist has been doing, to sow into our ministry to help us to continue to expand ministry and take it to the next level. I was in a meeting today, and we were looking at some futuristic things that we can do in ministry so that we continue to create an environment and create an atmosphere where people can encounter God and people can grow and connect with their church family. So I thank you, and we all thank you for your continued gifts and generosity to New Psalmist Baptist Church. So let's jump right on into our lesson for today. As we stopped off a couple weeks ago, we left off after talking about the prophets Elijah and Elisha. We talked about how the kingdom had been split into two, and now the northern kingdom, which is known as Israel, and the southern kingdom known as Judah, are both on different trajectories, but both trajectories are going further and further away from what God intended for them to be. You'll recall, and those of you who've been going through the readings with us, reading through the book of 2 Kings, each time a new king comes to power, we find out right away either they did evil in the eyes of the Lord or they obeyed the Lord's commands and turned their hearts back to God. So we continue to see this thing that king after king is coming to power, especially in Israel, and doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. And we see, and as we've been kind of teasing it so far, that there's a destruction on the way. So let's jump right on into it. I'm excited about this lesson because it's starting to get good. We start to see how a lot of stuff starts to really transpire. So we're going to pick up right in Israel. We're going to look at Israel first. Remember, the kingdom is split in two. We're looking at Israel, and there's a king that comes to power by the name of Jeroboam II. You'll remember Jeroboam was the first king of Israel. When he split off Jeroboam and Rehoboam split the kingdom in two, and Jeroboam took the northern kingdoms. But when Jeroboam became the king of Israel, he did not follow the commands of God. He built up for himself, he built up for their own worship calves. They built up golden idols that represented God's presence instead of going back down to Jerusalem. He didn't want them to go into Jerusalem, so they built their own calves, they built their own idols, they built their own places for worship, which was against God's commands. And they also began to worship other gods. The Canaanite gods that we have seen over and over, the gods of Baal, continue to creep back in to the existence of God's chosen people. And they keep turning away from Yahweh, the one and only God, and begin to worship other gods. And we've seen this trend continue to happen over and over. So the king by the name of Jeroboam II rises to power, and he reigns for 41 years. So he has a long reign, but he does evil in the eyes of the Lord. So he does not return their hearts to God. He continues the same worship of these other Canaanite gods, and he does not do as is instructed in the law of Moses. So that gives us our religious understanding of Jeroboam. But let's look a little deeper, because Jeroboam II gives us is a linchpin into what is getting ready to happen. So under Jeroboam's reign, though he does not turn their hearts back to God and follow the commands that were given, the law that was given through Moses, and does not keep the ways from the line of David and having a heart for God, he does do something. He's a good political leader. He expands the territory that the Israelites have, the nation of Israel has, and he gets the boundaries back up to where they were when King Solomon was in power. So he has expanded the territory. So now they have more land, they have more political power, they have created treaties, they have relationships with other nations, and they have trade, and they become very prosperous. But in this time of prosperity, as they're importing, exporting goods, as they're doing commerce on a larger level, they have more land, they have a strong military, they're able to do a lot of great things that a nation is able to do. Their elite class, the rich, began to get richer, but at the expense, the poor get poorer. So we see during the time of Jeroboam II, though there's a lot of prosperity in the land, there's a growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. That's something in a TV show. There's a great divide between the haves and the have-nots. So we see now that though they have gone away from God, they're able to be prosperous monetarily, but they do not have the social side to go along with it. So some are getting richer, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And the rich are oppressing the poor. They're using the poor to get what they need. They don't have any standards towards them. They're just doing whatever they see best in order so that they can get ahead and they can do more and more and more. Jeroboam II, this is under his reign, and then it follows. But interesting thing happens. We see that they've turned away from God. They're worshiping other gods, the gods of Baal. They have these high places where they're offering sacrifice. They have Asherah poles all over. So they have other gods that they're worshiping. They have now become a polytheistic culture. They are not monotheistic. They don't just serve the one and only God, Yahweh. They have multiple gods. So they serve Yahweh. They observe some of Yahweh's commands, but they also worship Baal. They also have sacrifices to other gods. So they no longer have the singular God, the singular deity of Yahweh. And because of that, there's a constant hand of destruction that is now starting to fall upon them. Interesting note happens after Jeroboam II. There's 6 kings after him before the destruction of Israel. 4 of those kings are assassinated. You got to get that. 4 of the last 6 kings of Israel are assassinated because evil and destruction has so permeated their culture, so permeated their society, that there's constant struggles for power. There are constantly people rising up to try to take the throne, to try to take power, and they're all doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. Let's back it up. One of the themes we talked about at the beginning of this Bible study, many of you will remember we talked about sin. We spent a lot of time talking about the origins of sin because I told you, it keeps coming back. We see it now. It is now permeated into such a level where everything that's happening in this society is now, the sin has become so big and now destruction is falling upon them. So we see this throughout the leaders of Israel. But at the same time, there's another power rising up, and that's the Assyrian Empire. At the same time, though Israel has expanded, they've taken back the lands that were all in the kingdom, the United Kingdom under Solomon. But at the same time, there's another power that's expanding. That's the Assyrian Empire. And as the Assyrian Empire begins to rise up and grow stronger and stronger, they become a regional force. In fact, after the death of Jeroboam II, a new king comes to power in Assyria, and he begins to expand the Assyrian Empire and becomes an imperialistic state. So they're looking to gain more land, to gain more territory, so that they have more power. Because remember, in this day and age, and even today, land is seen as power. Where you can go back to the 1800s, the early 19th century, and you see that the big nations, the great nations, the national powers, they were defined by how many territories they had. That's why a lot of the islands we see, even off the coast of the United States, speak other languages, because they were colonized by European nations, whether it's Spain, England, France, that came in and colonized those imperialist powers, because having more territory, having more land defined how powerful you were. That's why if you ever go back and study world history, you'll see that especially throughout the continent of Africa, there are so many different nations in different places, and that's because different nations came down from Europe and began to colonize different areas. They took them as territories. They put their language, they put their government structure, they put their trade systems, their policies in those lands, and they went in, took over the culture, and they put their stamp on those areas, and that's what defined their power. Same thing here. The Assyrian Empire is beginning to expand, and the new king continues to go and grow, and wants to grow the Assyrian Empire. But at the same time, we see that in Israel, they realize that there's a new power in the land, and that if they're not careful, they'll be overtaken by the Assyrian Empire. So the king of Israel at the time, Pekah, tries to develop an alliance with another king, the king of Aram, so that they have two nations that are able to fight and battle against the Assyrian Empire. So he's trying to be strategic because he sees the impending doom. He sees how this other nation is beginning to gain steam, and little by little, piece by piece, they're picking off parts of the empire so that before they come to the capital that is now in Samaria. So we see this theme happening over and over. But at the same time, you'll recall as when we began this Bible study, we talked about how the Old Testament is broken up, and we have the books of history, the books of law rather, followed by the books of history, which we are studying through right now, the books of poetry, the major prophets, minor prophets, the books of prophets. And we see the prophets, just to give you take it a little step further, the prophets speak during much of the time that's found and detailed throughout the books of history. So at the same time as all of this is happening in Israel, they've turned away from God. They have turned away from God generation after generation. They have no connection back to the authentic worship, the authentic practice, and living completely in accordance to the law that God gave through Moses. This is Israel, so they have no connection to it anymore. These generation after generation has now been raised up, and they're completely separated, completely apart from the way that God intended for them to live. Instead, now, all they've known is this weird mix of Yahweh along with Canaanite gods and Canaanite religion. So, they are so far gone, they don't see how to ever get back. And truthfully, they don't even know that they're doing wrong. That's the thing to always remember. Sometimes people are born into stuff and they don't even know how it used to be. So God raises up prophets to go into the land and to tell them what they should be doing, that he is not pleased with their actions and how they should correct them, or they will have to face this impending destruction. So at this time, there are 3 prophets that we'll talk about today that are intertwined with this story we find in the book of 2 Kings as we look at the destruction of Israel. The first prophet is the prophet Amos. Amos is from Judah, but God sends him up to Israel to tell them what thus saith the Lord, and give them a clue that they're doing wrong, and give them instruction on how they need to do right. So Amos goes up to Israel, and he has a message that is focused on justice. They for so long have been doing the religious practice, whether it's the worship or whether it was offering the sacrifices to God, but at the same time, they had other gods, and they also weren't treating others right. They were lacking justice. This is a critical thing to understand. They were lacking justice socially. They were not interacting properly. So the prophet Amos has a message that goes to the Israelites up in Israel, and he tells them that you guys have forsaken justice. You guys have not done things, not treated people right. The social side of your existence is not right. Not to say that the religious side was completely wrong, but what it does say is that you can't divorce the two. You can't have religious practice without treating people right. You have to have the religious organization, the religious structure intact, but you also have to treat people right, and you have to do right by people. And Amos is raised up. God sends him up there to teach them and to show them the error of their ways. They've been using those low in society to get ahead. They've been stepping on others so that they can get what they want, and in the process, they are treating people wrong. And God sends him to tell them that that's not right. Anybody who knows, if you know anything about that, I see some of you guys writing the amens. Just type amen, send up the hearts. If you know that there have been times where you've either read the prophet Amos or even seen it in your own life where people try to separate the two. But no, you can't have religious practice without treating people right. You gotta do it. It all is connected. That's why some of you who are scholars in African American history, you may notice that at times Dr. Martin Luther King would pull on the prophet Amos in his teachings and in his speeches and in his sermons, because Amos talked about justice, the need for justice. You can't just have religiosity. You got to also have justice. So that's the prophet Amos exposes the need for justice. So that's the first prophet we look at. The second prophet is the prophet Hosea. He is a native of Israel. So he's from Israel, the people that he has been sent to prophesy to give a message from God. And he tells of Israel using parables. He uses a parable, an interesting parable. He uses a parable of a man who is who chooses to marry a prostitute, and she is not faithful to the husband. She has other suitors. She sleeps with other men. She is not faithful to the husband. And this is a representation where the groom is God. The groom is Yahweh. And the bride is Israel. Israel has not been pure and not given the husband rather, who is Yahweh, the right respect. They have given themselves to other gods. They've gone in other directions. They've gone away from their one husband, and now there's so much other stuff that has entered into the relationship. And God sends Hosea to show them this through this parable, so that they see how the worship of other gods, the sacrifices to other gods, the building monuments, the building calves, the building idols to other gods is really opening them up when they were supposed to be faithful to God. So that's another prophet that we have that God sends to send this message, so that they begin to understand it and they begin to see it clearly of how they are doing wrong. But this is the other side that the prophets also come with. They come with a message showing them the error of their ways. But they also come with a prophetic message of destruction. That's critical. You can't miss that. They come with the message of destruction. And especially in the prophet Amos. Amos shares the message of impending destruction. And in Amos's message, there is not much grace. It's interesting, somebody's watching this and saying, well, God loves everybody. Why is there not much grace here? Why don't we see the prophets coming and tell the people that they can turn from their ways right now and they'll be all right? Well, God's sending them. They've gone generation after generation after generation, turning away. God instructed them that if they do not do what he commanded them to do, all they have to do is serve him and him only, follow his commands. And if they don't do it, then destruction will find them. So when the prophets come, the people are so far turned away from God that the prophets come to show them the error of their ways, but also show them that destruction is going to come because of their actions. So we see time after time in the prophets, they're telling them that you can't do this. This is the path that is going to lead you on. We've seen it before. We saw two prophets come before. We saw Elijah go up and have a showdown on Mount Carmel, and all the prophets of Baal ran, and he told them that they need to turn their hearts back to God, and some did, but they didn't listen long enough, and they went back into the cycle. They did not heed the warning. That's a great way to say it, Mr. Doug. They did not heed the warning, and now God is sending in prophets to tell them and get them ready for what is getting ready to happen for them. A third one I want to throw in here is the prophet Jonah. Many of you know about Jonah. Jonah and the whale. You've heard that story many times. We've seen it in the printed pictures in the kiddie Bibles, where Jonah was instructed by God to go to Nineveh. Jonah is from Galilee in the north. He's instructed by God to go to Nineveh. And Jonah gets in a boat going in the opposite direction. He tries to go in the opposite direction, and God sends a storm. Everybody else on the boat realizes and identifies that Jonah is the reason that this storm has come. Jonah gets thrown overboard. Storm stops. Jonah gets swallowed up in a big fish's mouth. In that fish's mouth, he has a prayer. And after that prayer, the fish spits him out on shore, and he walks a couple days to Nineveh. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Somebody it just clicked. If it clicked for you just now, tap the screen. So somebody just starting to understand how all this stuff works together. Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And God sends Jonah to Nineveh to share a message that they are heading in the wrong path and they need to stop the things that they're doing. So these are three stories that are intertwined that we see here in the book of 2 Kings. And that I wanted to make sure as we look at the destruction of Israel, that you understand how they all stack together. As we move further along in our Bible study course throughout the weeks, and as we get to the prophets, I'll go back and we'll talk a little bit more about how they all fall chronologically and where they all fit in the different messages that each one had. But I wanted to make sure I gave you a little bit so you understood where the message was coming from, because they had warnings. They had people telling them that this wasn't the right way to go. They had people going to them saying, well, no, if you keep doing what you're doing, this is what's coming. Then they even got the warning saying, no, this is what's going to happen. And they still do not turn their hearts back to God. So now we're in the middle of the Assyrian crisis, and the time comes where Assyria is finally going to break in. So the final king of Israel is a king by the name of Hoshea. King Hosea. Hoshea. 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 He's the last king of Israel. He comes to power, and after his 30th year in office, he is seized by the king of Assyria for not paying his tribute. They have cut a deal where they're paying tribute. So essentially, they're being taxed by the Assyrian Empire. And one year, he decided he wasn't going to pay the tribute. He paid it to Egypt, the king of Egypt. So the Assyrian king comes in, and they take him out of Israel. And they go in, the Assyrian Empire goes in, and they capture Samaria, which you'll remember we talked about was the new capital of Israel. And they take all the people out of Israel and move them to the Assyrian Empire, scatter them all about. I've been teasing it. The date, remember, 722 BC. Now, all the Israelites, those in the nation of Israel, have been scattered about in the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire brings people from all over to live in Israel, the land that was formerly occupied by the nation Israel. That's where we get it. We've been talking about it, and now we see where the 10 lost tribes of Israel, where that comes from. A lot of times many of you have heard it in different places, 10 lost tribes, but this is what happened. They were taken away and scattered about, never to be fully put back together again. So let's look at that. Let's pause and let's look at the events that led up to this moment where now they are out of the land that God gave them. They're scattered about, never to be put back together again. It all starts back when after the death of Solomon, Jeroboam and Rehoboam split the kingdom. Jeroboam goes to the north, and he has the tribes. He has more people. He has more land. He has power. Because remember, they went and made him their king. But he makes the critical mistake, and in his quest to unify and to maintain his power, he put up his own places of worship to Yahweh instead of allowing the people to go back down to Jerusalem. And because of that, they continued to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. They broke the command, and the nation was doomed from that moment. And sin continues to build generation after generation, leader after leader. The assassinations, murders, there's so much done wrong. And by the time we get to King Hoshea, the Assyrians come right in, take all the people, scatter them about, and now we have the lost tribes of Israel. Another footnote just to drop this in, all the people from the different places of the Assyrian Empire that were brought in, they had calamity that hit them. So the king of Assyria went back and got one of the priests of Israel to come back to instruct them on how to worship properly to Yahweh. The priest came back, but they never fully went back in, or never fully adopted and observed the laws and the commands of Moses. So they had new religions that were a creation of many different thought, many different practices. And that is what that is what occupies in the northern kingdoms. That is what occupies in the nation, the physical location of the nation of Israel. So now we're down to one nation remaining, and that is the nation of Judah. So at the time when the Assyrians are taking over Israel, the Assyrians don't plan to stop. The Assyrians are an imperialist nation. They're trying to get as much land as they can. So they're saying, we got the north, we're going to keep on going because we want all of this land to add to our empire. So around the same time, a new king arises in Judah by the name of Hezekiah. This king in Judah, he does what's right in the eyes of the Lord. He tears down the altars, the high places, he breaks them apart, and he returns things back to the way that they were instructed by Moses, the law of Moses. So Hezekiah is doing what's right in the eyes of the Lord. He's turning the people back to proper observance of the commands, of the instructions, of the covenants that they've made with God. So this is great. And because he does this, he is extremely successful in all things. We've seen this so many times. We remember throughout these books of history, the Deuteronomic historian continues to remind us that whenever they turn their heart back to God and observe God's commands, God gives them success. God makes them prosperous. God fights with them in battle. God gives their enemies at their hands. So Hezekiah is extremely successful in all the things that he does. But at the same time, the Assyrians are coming down. They're a powerful nation. And the Assyrians are trying to get Judah. So now we have a showdown where the Assyrians are trying to get in. Hezekiah has been successful in all the things. And the Assyrians come in and they take the outposts, the citadel cities, the strongholds. They get them and they have command of them. And Hezekiah sends a message saying, we didn't do it. I didn't do nothing wrong. Leave us alone. And he gives them a little something. But then they send messengers in. And then now they're trying to really get in. They say, okay, we got a little bit, but we're not stopping here. So an army of over 185,000 are ready to lay besiege on Judah to take down those remaining that are in the covenant with God. These are the last chosen people. Because remember, Israel's gone now. So Judah is all that's left. There are no more two nations. There's only one. And that's the nation of Judah. So at the same time, remember in Israel, we had prophets that were sent. We also have prophets in Judah. There are prophets to Israel, prophets to Judah. We'll talk about that more as we travel down through our course. But remember, there's some prophets that speak and bring prophetic messages to the nation of Israel. There are other prophets that bring messages and intercede and bring what God, thus saith the Lord, to those in Judah. So remember those two distinctions. The first prophet that we're going to talk briefly about, we're going to cover him a lot more later. This is the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah is divided. I'll give you a little bit right here. Isaiah is divided into three sections. The first Isaiah is what we find Isaiah to Judah. This is Isaiah 1 through 39. This is the beginning. This is Isaiah of Jerusalem. So Isaiah, the prophet, has a message for Hezekiah. And he tells Hezekiah that the Assyrians will not be successful, but God will fight for them and they will have to retreat. So Isaiah gives this message to Hezekiah. And then the next day, the king of Assyria goes and looks at his forces, and 185 of his men are dead. The Lord has killed 185,000 of his men right there. And the king of Assyria retreats, and the people of Judah are safe. God has fought their battle because their leader has turned their hearts back to God. So we see that parallel. In the north, the leaders continue to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. In the south, the leader has turned their hearts back to God. And because of that, God fights their battle. God protects them. God makes it so that the Assyrians do not come in and scatter them all over the face of the earth. But instead, God stands up for them. He upholds his end of the covenant and says, if you follow my laws and command me, I will protect you. I will fight for you. God said, I will not let any of your enemies overtake you if you follow my commands and you observe my laws. And Hezekiah has brought the people back into right relationship with God. And because of that, God fights for them. God defeats their enemies for them. One more note I'm going to drop on Hezekiah and Isaiah, and then we're going to stop for today and pick up next week with the destruction of Jerusalem and of Judah, because they got right now, but we'll talk about that more. So Hezekiah has been taken with a serious illness, and it looks like death is imminent. And he prays to God, saying, God, don't let this happen to me. I need your healing. And God sends Isaiah a message saying, go to Hezekiah and tell him that he will not die right now. He's got 15 years added to his life, and he's going to see the Assyrians be defeated. He goes to the message. The Assyrians come back, and there's another battle, and the Assyrians are defeated. And these defeats have ramifications, because remember, the king of Assyria has marched through Israel. They've laid besiege to Israel, scattered them all about. Then he comes down to Judah, and he's stopped. He goes back home, and he's killed. He's assassinated because he left battle. They weren't successful by this little army. New king comes in, not successful again. They begin to lose their power. And because of that, they start to fall off, and they're no longer as no longer as invincible as they were. And they are taken over by other powers. Others rise up. Hezekiah gets a letter from some well-wishers in the new empire called the Babylonian Empire. They come to him, come to his palace to send him a letter saying, we heard you were sick, and we're glad that you are all right. Hezekiah, great leader, he thanks them for the letter, the messengers who send the letter, and he shows them all the treasures in his palace. He shows them everything he has. He takes them, he shows them all his stashes of money. He shows them his stashes of gold. He shows them his stashes of resources. He shows them everything. Shows them all the goods that he has in the palace. And Isaiah, who had just come to Hezekiah saying you're going to be healed and you're going to see the defeat of your enemy, comes back and says, what did you show him? He tells them all they showed him. And he says, those same ones you showed, all the stuff they're going to have, one day they're going to take all of that out of here back to Babylon. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Because just when it looks like things are getting good, that they're back on the right track, we see a little foreshadowing that though they're back on the right track now, they're going to do wrong. And this is just a quick hint. When Hezekiah dies, his son comes to the throne, and you can guess what he does. He does evil in the eyes of the Lord. So that's where we're going to stop for this week. I hope that this was enlightening for some of you guys. If you learned something today, if you were enlightened in any fashion, just send in an emoji, a comment with the hand up, the clapping hands. Oh, thank you, Mom. You're so kind. You're so kind. Send in an emoji with the clapping hands, praying hands, hands up. Send in the hearts. I want to make sure these Periscopes have been blessing you. I know each week as I go and prepare, I'm learning more things. Every time you go back and reread anything, restudy anything, you always learn so much more. And the history of the Israelite people, the history of God's chosen people is so rich because it shows us so much that we can learn. So many of the pitfalls that they fell into that we can learn so that we don't fall into. Because many of us know that there have been times where we fell away from God and God sent us warnings. God sent us people to speak into our spirit, whether it was in a sermon, whether it was through a family friend, whether it was through somebody just sending us a message saying, you need to get your life together. And we didn't want to listen to him. And before we knew it, we found ourselves having to deal with some type of destruction that could have been avoided had we done what God told us to do. So as we continue to go back and study this, there's so many things we can learn. So next week, we're going to pick up and we're going to look at the destruction of Jerusalem and what happens when those Babylonians come in. Because the Assyrians have already cleared out the north. The nation of Israel is gone. It's just Judah left. They do right. I'll give you a foretaste, a foreshadowing. Josiah comes in, renews the covenant, does some great things. But how long is it going to last? So we're going to pick it up and look at what happened there. So I hope you guys were blessed today. As always, continue to share this message on Periscope. It'll be up for the next 24 hours. And then all the others will be on our YouTube channel. So you can watch all the Bible studies. If you missed any of them, you can go back and watch them anytime at your leisure. The link is right in my bio. Of course, follow me right here on Periscope. Swipe to the right. Click my picture, click follow, so you get updates. And check me out on Twitter and Instagram at MINJ_Thomas. So talk to you guys soon. See you next week. All the millennials and new psalmists, don't forget, if you're interested in the missions trip to Jamaica, send me an email to jathomas@newpsalmist.org so we make sure you get all the information. So until next week, y'all stay empowered. Be blessed. See you soon.